This is the Get a Life podcast. Ex-Cult Conversations.
Hello everybody and welcome to the Get a Life podcast, Ex-Cult Conversations. We're here today with my friends Ross and Gilly and Anne, and we're joined by our very special guest, Murray Chattell. Murray, like us, is an ex-member of the PBCC, and we'll perhaps start at the very beginning, Murray, and you could tell us when you left and what led up to you leaving the PBCC.
Hi, well, yeah, thanks for having me on. When did I leave? It's a bit of I guess technically I left in 2017, but in reality I didn't officially leave probably till the end of 2019. Was that right? 2019, 2018. They all flow into one another. But yeah, I was born into the PBCC, as were my parents. Brought up on one of 9 children in Northampton. It was growing up was a challenge for me, and I guess really my journey towards leaving started when I was 8 or 9. Actually, as a child, I don't know. Ross certainly knows a few people in Northampton, and Anne and Gilly would know a few of the characters and the families or whatever. But my family, we weren't the top of the tree as far as the hierarchy went. My dad, lovely guy, wouldn't do anyone a mean trick. He was a little bit unusual, and he didn't necessarily fit the mold, which actually now I'm quite proud of him for. At the time, though, as a child, I used to get picked on and bullied a bit, and it was like, because my dad was a bit unusual. I can remember I think I was probably 10 at the time, 9 or 10, and I was literally sick to the back teeth of being bullied. I'd had enough of it, and I thought, fuck it, if you can't beat them, join them. So I consciously made a decision to rebel against my parents, which I guess kind of set me up for the rest of my life, because in doing that, in my attempt to fit in, I kicked against the status quo. You know, if somebody said no, I said why, and if they couldn't give me a good reason, I stuck my nose in it and found out why. And that was if you like, that was my all through life. That's probably been, whether it's a challenge or a good thing, I think it's a good thing on hindsight. But it did get me into a lot of trouble.
So when you say your dad was different and didn't fit the mold, as being ex-members, we all understand what the mold is because we've all come from that background. But perhaps explain to our listeners what that would have meant practically. Was he his own person? Was he a free spirit, or in what way?
Essentially, he was his own person. And I think the biggest thing was he wasn't very vocal. So my dad's a very, very intelligent person. Socially, he's not very interactive. In the sense, if he's got nothing to say, he won't make an effort to say anything. Whereas the norm within the Brethren is, it's all about social interaction, and, entertaining's a formality really, and people coming into your home and you host them and you entertain them and you give them a good time. On hindsight, I honestly don't think anybody ever left my dad's house undernourished or mistreated. I would challenge someone to come and point out a time when they did. But, my dad there's nothing to say. He's not going to make conversation for the sake of it. He was also very, his father actually put up a lot of money to build the Northampton City church back in 1979. And my dad, he grew up very privileged. He had a lot of spare time on his hands. He didn't really have to work at that time. And he was very, very involved in the construction of the church. And he kind of treated it like it was his project. And if any of my peers, well, I was very young, I was born in 1980, so 79 was when the church was built. So I was a child, we'd get into trouble for running around on the seats after the meeting and playing with the microphones. And my dad wouldn't hesitate to tell me off or anyone else he saw playing with the microphones. But he then became, among my peers, he became labelled the policeman. Whereas my friends' dads all appeared to be a little bit more chilled out and a bit more socially interactive. And as I say, I love my dad to bits and I love my mum to bits. And part of my, I'm going to say anger, because I think that's what it is, that I don't harbour it, but I do have, is that my dad was very much misused, mistreated. He's very intelligent. He will do anything for anybody, and people would take advantage of that. But he was still, in a lot of people's opinion, a substandard Plymouth Brother because he didn't take part in the meetings. He was very awkward when he was asked to preach or say something. He was very awkward and therefore he wasn't normal. Whatever normal is, apart from a setting on a washing machine.
Well, exactly. He wasn't brethren normal.
He wasn't brethren normal.
Yes.
And he would, but they were quite happy to use him, when they wanted him, when they had a technical problem or something that they couldn't, he struggled in business. He had, so he had property, he inherited property from my grandfather, and that was his income. And I think it was, I'm going to suggest it was round about the late 1980s. I think it was Jim Simonton said that you wouldn't want to, I stand to be corrected on that, but he said you wouldn't want to, you wouldn't rent property to worldly people, non-brethren, because you don't know what they're doing, what they might be doing in your property.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
It was something. So my dad, bless him, in his naivety, he sold all his properties.
Were these residential properties that he had?
Yeah, I think there were. Yeah, there were residential, and there was a couple of commercial ones. I think.
I see. Yeah.
Bear in mind, I was only 9 or 10 at the time. I was very, and let's put it this way: if I'd been 18 or 20, he would not have sold those as easily, But he was very much, wouldn't harm anybody. This was the right thing to do. The man of God has spoken. I'll do what I'm told, without any foresight or thinking. Like, he went on blind faith, without thinking, well, hang on, I'm killing the goose that lays the golden egg. This is what I live off. This is what feeds my family. This is how we survive. And then, of course, and bless him, he attempted to set up a business and failed. And he then got swallowed up by another local family business commercially. And he was always very much looked down upon for failing in business. That was a shameful thing to do. And it just added to his abnormality, if you like, as far as the brethren were concerned. So I found this again, but then this also fed into my fight between being rejected and accepted. I always had this desire to be accepted, and I'm an all or nothing person. I often talk about we used to go to the street preaching, and I used to hate it, absolutely hate standing on the street. But I thought, well, if I'm going to go to all that effort and overcome all that fear to actually step out there and make a dick of myself and shout down Abington Street, Northampton. I might as well do it properly. I didn't see the point in going and mumbling, so I would go all out and give it beans. And I remember once one guy walked up to me when I was preaching, and he was all dressed in leathers, but like a biker guy, a Hell's Angels type guy. Yeah. He walked right up to me, and I thought, in my head, I was thinking, shit, I'm in trouble here. For some reason, I just kept talking. I literally kept, to the point, he was like right in front of my face, and he just held his hand out. He goes, mate, he said, I admire your courage. I was like, oh, fucking hell.
That wasn't what you were expecting, a punch in the face more. You got
I was
a complimentary word.
Around the ear,
yeah.
But yeah, I kind of resented that, the way that my dad was treated, and to a degree still is, the way he was disrespected. My mum, bless her, she's a lovely person. I'm one of 9. Our house was quite chaotic. I could iron my own shirts at the age of 9 or 10, because if they're washed, just be thankful. If you want to iron, you do it yourself.
You do it yourself.
And again, she was probably looked down upon for that. She was definitely despised because she didn't, we didn't have an amazingly immaculate house 24/7. We didn't live in a show home. We lived in a home that had 9 children in it. And to be fair, my parents, they did their best. They did their best. I mean, I've learned a lot since, having spoken to professionals, trying to understand myself as a person. Even just being one of 9 children has an effect on you emotionally, mentally, physically. Actually, for 14 months of my life, I was the apple of my parents' eye. I was the focus in the household. I was the baby. My sister was born. 14 months later, I was born. 14 months later, my younger brother was born. Right up until the age of, I remember when my youngest sister, I remember my parents telling me that, I'm expecting another baby. And all I thought was, shit, by the time she's my age, I will be 40. And I walked out of the house and went to the pub and got absolutely hammered. But that in itself was, but even that was a naivety. It was like, well, there's no contraception. There's no, we'll breed like rabbits. Children are God-given. If God gives us one, he gives us one. If he gives us 10, he gives us 10.
I can remember that very much being the ethos in the 70s and 80s. It was a case of the more children you have, the better. God's blessing you, almost. Never mind whether the poor mother could actually cope with more children, I think.
Exactly. I mean, it's no wonder. Okay, my mum, bless her, she didn't drink alcohol. She doesn't drink tea and coffee, and she doesn't drink alcohol. So she's quite amazing for a brethren person, to be honest with you. But it's no wonder people turn within there. They do turn to alcohol. They do turn to, they do. They've probably got PTSD.
It's a coping mechanism, isn't it? If you've got more to do, you got more to do than you know how to cope with, and you don't know how to cope. It's a coping mechanism.
Yeah.
And it's readily available, encouraged in the brethren.
Exactly. And I find that I think everybody in there has to have a secret life they're coping with of some sort. Whether it's wrong as far as brethren are concerned, or whether it's them just struggling with natural thoughts and natural, human propensities. They're coping
there's
with
a word I haven't heard for a while. And for our non-listeners, that's a very brethren phrase, judging your propensities, isn't it?
Your fleshly propensity.
That's it.
Fleshly,
Yeah.
that's it.
No,
Yes.
fleshly
Yeah.
propensities.
How often do you hear about those, Anne, on a Tuesday night?
Yeah. Sorry, Murray, carry on.
Sorry. Yeah.
No.
But so yeah. So fast forward. I guess I spent all my teenage years. I was trying to prove something. All my life, I was trying to prove something. And another significant fact was, so I went to mainstream school until I was 14. So we had lower, middle and upper in Northampton at that time. And I did lower school, middle school, and then you went to upper school at, I think 14 was the first year. And I did 1 year at NSB, which is Northampton School for Boys, which is a good school. It's a recognised school. And it's an interesting fact that I was never top of the class, but I always got my homework done on time and I always got reasonable grades. Again, I think it was part of me not wanting to be a failure, not wanting to fit in. So I had a teacher, I had peers at school that I was, performing against, if you like. I had teachers that had expectations. So I delivered my work on time. And then it eventually came back from John Hales from Australia that we should have our own schools. And at that, so very naively, I mean, it was done differently in different countries. It was handled differently. But I know in the UK, we basically went on to this correspondence course, Carmarthen.
Yeah.
I did a couple of correspondence courses through them.
Yeah. And so bear in mind, technology, I was at school, I was doing really well in design technology. That was where my, if I've got a talent, that's where it would lie. And I was doing really well. But also, bear in mind, I wasn't allowed to use computers. So I was doing all the work that the other kids were doing on computers. I was doing it by hand. And anyway, my parents pulled me out again, just without thinking about anything, the consequences or any, because they pulled me out of mainstream school. And which they then received a very, very snotty letter from the head of design technology at NSB saying it was a real shame and shocking that you'd take Murray away with a very promising student for the school and potentially, I mean, obviously he was looking at, he wants some good grades and potentially I was one of his better options, his chances of a decent GCSE and an A-level grade.
But it was also potentially your future. If it was a subject that you liked and you were good at, that's potentially a route you could have followed for a work career.
Exactly.
Potentially. So I agree, teachers want pupils that make them look good. I teach myself. But it is your future as well, that he may have been thinking, what's happening here? And
I was probably in one of the best schools in Northampton to achieve that, short of going to a private institution. It was it was a grant maintained school at that time, so it wasn't it was I mean, it's still now a recognized institution. But then so I was taken from that environment to an environment where I think I had history, geography, maths, English and physics.
And you were how old at this point?
I was 14.
15. So you would have been what is now the first year of O-levels or GCSEs. Final 2 years of secondary school. Correct.
Yeah. So I did the first year, which is your of upper school, which was your you decide what subjects you want to do for GCSE or whatever.
That's right.
And just as I went to do the
GCSE. Yeah.
That's right. You've got it. Year 9, and just as I was about to go and do my GCSEs, I was pulled out, and I had these. I remember it. They're 5 white ring binders with a ream of paper in each one, black and white wording, piss boring. I had a little desk set up in the spare room, looking out over the garden, and I was meant to go in there at 9 o'clock. And you go in there and shut the door, and I didn't come out until midday. And I was meant to wade through these things. My mum, bless her, she had too much to do. She couldn't even. She hadn't got a hope of helping us. You know, she tried. She did her best. And I lost interest. I was bored.
So
I was.
I think for any 14-year-old lad in those circumstances is not going to. But what were the reasons at the time put out by, it was John Hales, wasn't it, that said about the schooling? What was the reason given for taking children out of mainstream school? And I understand it was at secondary age at that point, wasn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, we were told to take all of our children out of school.
Right.
Because it would have been the same year. You're talking about 94?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
It'd be 94.
Well, in Coventry, a certain person stood up and told us to take our children out of school. And we were one of the obedient ones. And we took Clinton and Scott out of school. They were in... Clint was just gone into what would be year 3. And Scott was in reception, whatever, year 1. And
but
we
no
took them
official reason given.
No, what I think is it's worth noting, because it did come out later. I think you'll find in Australia they didn't do the correspondence thing. In Australia, there was a whole plan set out. So John House's plan, I think, I'm right in saying, was quite. It was a complete plan, and they went straight into proper schools, or at least proper learning environments. Yeah. Whereas in the UK, there was a document that got to the UK, but there was a hierarchy within the UK that didn't accept it or didn't like John Hales, and basically they made a dog's dinner of it, and we ended up doing correspondence. I don't think it was ever the design or intention that we did correspondence course.
We were told, the same person stood up 2 weeks later in Coventry and told us that by taking our children out of school, we had gone ahead of the Lord. Yeah.
Wow. I mean, my understanding...
I actually I insisted on a conversation with that person, and me and my ex had a meeting with him.
Had he forgotten he'd said there's that 2 weeks before?
Oh, well, he does forget things, doesn't he? Yeah.
Yeah, they do. Yeah. But my understanding too was in Australia, and they still are, they're in a position where their schools are much more state funded than our schools here in the UK. And from talking to other people, I kind of got the impression they were doing it in Australia, so we kind of had to do it here in the UK, but the whole system of funding was so different that they didn't know quite how to execute it. Would that sort of be a fair?
Yeah, but this is the problem where you've got. I'm going to, for an analogy perspective, I'm going to suggest you've got a dictator and puppets, right? The dictator's got the plan. He's got the big picture. The puppets don't think for themselves, and they have to take the initiative but they don't want to step on the dictator's toes.
Yeah.
So what you end up with is people running around trying to do the right thing, misinterpreting it. Oh shit, we got that wrong. Backtracking. We should be doing this. And you just end up with this chaotic mess, which is effectively what we ended up with in the UK. I think in Australia, they get the funding for the schools. They were very ruthless, and I'm going to suggest smart in the approach. They went straight in there, convinced the authorities that they were a good entity and worth investing in. Whereas in the UK, we basically told them that we were a daft bunch of idiots before we'd even ask them for the money, Does that make
it does. But the UK, I mean, we won't get into the intricacies of the schooling funding, but they don't have the same taxpayer system of funding independent schools that Australia anyway. So so that was a double whammy for the brethren, wasn't it? They'd not done themselves any favours, and then
then the system didn't support it anyway.
The system didn't support it anyway. So But that actually would have affected a lot of teenagers, 10 to 16-year-olds education, wouldn't it? A lot within the Brethren. Almost every child in that age group at that point in the mid-90s would have had their education interrupted, wouldn't they?
Yeah, and the ones that,
I
mean, don't get me wrong, there were local, in Northampton, there was a couple of families where, the wives really took an interest in and stepped up to basically become teachers.
Yes.
And they did.
But you can't be a teacher as a mom.
No.
It doesn't work.
And to be fair, I'm not going to mention her name, but the sister in Northampton that did it, her family were all, well, she had one child my age, a year younger than me. The rest were all working. And, so she was kind of had spare time. Whereas my mum, bless her, she had like 9 children at home. She hadn't got a hope.
No.
And I'm not here to knock that whole process, but it is worth pointing out that there is a generation, if you like, of personnel within the Brethren. If they got any grades, it was because either they had exceptional parents, I'm going to say supersonic parents, or they're exceptionally intelligent. I'm very much I'm a visual learner. I learn by doing. I don't learn by reading. That's not my learning style. I used to go in there, I'd spend the morning designing a motor go-kart. And then as soon as I was allowed out, I'd go and work. I used to go and work for a local brother who had a bike shop. He gave me a job at the age of 14 to keep me out of trouble. I've never told him that actually what he did was he gave me an income so I could go and get into more trouble, but that's beside the point. I had a little bit of money and then I'd go off and spend 2 or 3 hours building this motor go-kart. And throughout those 2 GCSE years, I think I produced a petrol go-kart. That was, which then another young brother bought off me because he felt it was very unsuitable to have a go-kart.
He bought it and used it.
He bought it off. I think he part exchanged it for a keyboard and a keyboard and some money because he was just concerned that I was, going to the world with my
with your motor go-kart.
Going by the wayside. You were going by the wayside.
Exactly. Yeah.
So having had those 2 years, what did you go to work full time at 16, or did you stay on at college or?
So I stayed working for this brother at the bike shop until I was 17 when I got my driving license. That's interesting because then I wanted to go to college. I wanted to go to the local college. Actually, because I was such a problem, a local brother had spoken to John Hales at the time, and John Hales actually said the best thing for Murray would be for him to go back to mainstream school. Because I was,
he needs the discipline.
But anyway, the local authority, if you like, in Northampton decided amongst themselves, they discussed this and decided amongst themselves, well, they'd give me one more chance, and then if I messed up again, they'd then send me back to mainstream school. But of course, I was very much, when I heard this, I was like, I don't want to go back to mainstream school. Because bear in mind, I'd effectively be 2 years behind.
I
didn't learn till a long time later. They were actually looking to put me into a local private school at about something like 12 grand a year or something ridiculous.
Wow.
Because I'd never get back into that school I was at. But I think they got their knuckles wrapped because they didn't send me back to school. So when I was 17, I wanted to go to college, but they decided that I might get into trouble if I went to college. It's construction college would be terrible, and there'd be lots of drugs and bad influences and girls and things that might lead a young man astray. The fact I was pretty much a past master at getting myself into trouble without all those things. Didn't have anything to do with it. So instead, I went to work for a brother in Bedford who was a general builder. And I earned terrible money, but I viewed it. I had 4 years of college training on the tools, actually doing the work. So, and I'm thankful for that, because it's actually what I fell back on when I left the church in 2019. Lost my job then. But yeah, so get to my teenage years, and I mean, we could talk forever about detail, but my teenage years was when I really let's put it so, when I was 19, I wanted to leave.
Right.
I remember, so there were three Murrays, three personalities going on here. It's going to make me sound like a complete nutter, but there was the Murray that went to church, and there was the Murray that took part in the meetings. There was the Murray that would preach a good preaching. There was the Murray that was the entertainer, the host, what everybody saw. Then there was the Murray that hung out with his mates, and we did things like jump on a train and go to London for a Saturday, and we go to a restaurant and have a pint in a pub, but we keep ourselves to ourselves, and we didn't do anything particularly,
But to explain to our non-listeners, to do something like that, going to London for a day might have been okay, but the pint in the pub and the restaurant was definitely not okay, was it?
Absolutely. Yeah. And even jumping on a train, two young brothers, 19-year-old lads, going to London on a train, it would have been, my parents wouldn't have known every time that I went. They might have found out afterwards that I'd been there, but normally I was with someone else whose parents were perhaps a little bit more broad-minded.
It's almost synonymous with having a bit too much freedom, isn't it? Two 19-year-old lads going to London for the day. It
could only end in trouble.
Yeah, and the other thing is John Hales, I think he said something like, well, what would you want to go to London for? It's the city of sin, didn't he? Something like that.
Yes. Yeah.
So even going to London was a big
no-no.
Okay.
Yeah.
But actually, when you go there, you find out it's actually really interesting to spend time.
But it's also just to put you mentioned a few times as teenagers, I'm getting into trouble. We all understand what you mean, but for listeners who are non-brethren, Murray going to London for a day and going to a pub and a restaurant is getting into trouble, and that kind of puts it into context, doesn't it?
Well, this is it. When I talk to people now, and I say, well, but what were you doing? Like they think you're going to tell them that I was, murdering people or raping people or doing something really shocking. Yeah. And it's like, no, I was going to pubs and I went to a cinema and I went to a restaurant. And they're like, everything all right?
Were you scared doing that?
Oh, yeah. Oh,
yeah, because I couldn't have done that. I was too scared.
No, I couldn't have. No.
We used to do it, and I know when we used to go into a restaurant in London, we'd always be looking over our shoulder to see, if there was anybody about that might, see us and get us into trouble.
Yeah,
I was more scared of God's punishment on me rather than getting into trouble. Really, I had this constant fear of that.
Yeah, and that's a very real fear. That is. And that's and I think part of what primed me for leaving and actually surviving, or what I'm going to say, my survival in the outside world, if you like, in the normal world, was the fact that I tested that quite well growing up. I remember, I think it was Jim Simonson said, if you saw someone in the cinema queue, you could only assume they're on the road to hell. And this was what I've been told, So I never actually went to a cinema. I went to like the IMAX cinema in the Science Museum, and I justified that because it was the Science Museum. It wasn't the cinema. No. It's the IMAX. Yeah. Who are you kidding, mate?
Yeah. But it's a film on a big screen.
It's a film on a big screen. Yeah. But, it was just this... It was this pre-programmed thing in the back of your head that, I'm hellbound,
Yeah.
So I'm going to say, and the third Murray was the one that even my closest friends didn't know about. So, the lads I'd go to London with, and that was the Murray that would disappear out on a Friday night and go to and end up in a nightclub, and also experimented with young ladies, did things that normal teenage boys do, but it was very, very abnormal in brethren, and to the point that so that's why when I say when I was 19, I thought I need to leave. I can't, because I needed to confess that I'd slept with, I wasn't a virgin anymore. And it was about the time when I got married. I got married in 2003. In the end, sort of early 2000s, you started getting you got interviews before you got married, and you were asked questions: are you in the clear? Are you pure? Have you confessed all your sins and this sort of thing? And I had this problem because I had a problem in my head, because if I confessed that I'd been with women, which was the right thing I should do to get myself in the clear to get married, I'd then become labelled second-hand goods as far as the brethren were concerned. So my chances of marrying anyone remotely
normal,
and say marrying anyone I fancied was very, very slim.
Yeah.
And so I had this dilemma: do I incriminate myself by confession, or do I just get up and leave? Because clearly I don't fit. All my life I just didn't fit. I was racked with guilt. My life, always I was guilty. I'd always done something I shouldn't do. Like you said about, and go to London and you feel guilty, and we get up for the supper at silly o'clock the next morning and go to the Lord's Supper, Holy Communion, as non-brethren might recognise it as. And we'd go there, and I'd be like, I'd just be a fraud. I'd be taking part in the formalities of the sermon or the Lord's Supper, and I'd just be, and I'd sit there, and I just felt terrible, miserable.
And just to sort of clarify that again, from I'm sure it hasn't changed, but from what I remember, the Lord's Supper, the as they call it, which is Holy Communion, they put a great importance on, and the whole idea of a Saturday evening was that you kind of washed yourself of your sins, cleansed yourself, and went there with a pure mind. So if you're going there knowing that the Friday night you'd been out in a nightclub and had a good time, you probably go there with a very sort of confused state of mind, I imagine.
Yes, yeah. And not only that, as a brother, as a man, you were expected to take part. Yeah. And there was an order of service, and it moved. It was very fluid, and it was governed by the hymns that the sisters gave out, and it would, you could move from one part of the service to another, and you'd be sitting there trying to think. I don't know how you ever found this, Ross and Gilly, but you'd be sitting there thinking, what am I going to say? And you just about got something sorted out, and someone else would, a sister would give out a hymn that moved you on to the next part of the service. And you'd be sitting there, and you think like, and then, I remember people going to say, Murray, why do you always get up at the end? And, you wait. I was like, I did sake, mate. If you knew what I went through,
I did one of two things. I either got up straight after we'd had the emblems.
Yeah.
Or I got up, last like you did.
Yeah. And it was kind of, but you weren't meant to say the same thing every week. You had to have something fresh.
But I think the other thing on that is, and I often discuss it with people who have still kept their faith in that. The amount of times you actually consider what you look back at what you said, and I don't know if you agree with this, but 99% of the time, you weren't actually thinking about what you were speaking to God or to the Lord about. It was always about how it would sound to those surrounding you.
Yeah.
So it wasn't real in your faith. It was more about impressing your peers and trying to impress. The people who were around you.
Exactly. It was all about blowing smoke up everyone else's asses. Yeah. It was nothing. It was nothing to do with my relationship with God.
Yeah. No, nothing.
It was dressed up as that.
Yeah.
But
the same with giving out hymns. I mean, the spirit moving you.
Yeah.
Any spirit that was probably moving me was the whiskey from the night before.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's put it this way: you get up at 6 a.m. with a shocking hangover and try and sit for an hour.
Many's the time I've done that.
Yeah.
pretend to be godly, and you know.
It's a horrible way, though. It's a horrible, like, at the end before I left. It eats away at you.
It does.
That living like that is unbearable.
It's living a lie, isn't it?
Yeah.
To yourself.
It's so
we
bad,
can laugh
though.
about this now.
Yeah.
We can laugh about it now, but the pressure and the guilt that I felt, and I think everyone here would testify to that, knowing that I was actually a complete fraud, and I was trying really hard not to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I just couldn't be what I was meant to be.
Yeah.
You know, no matter how hard I tried. You know, we were meant to read 2 or 3 hours of ministry a day and this kind of thing. I could not get into it. You know, give me a Hardy Boys book, give me a Commando.
I've always said I think I've actually read more ministry since I left the Brethren than I ever did when I was out, because you have a different viewpoint on it when you read it when you leave. Yeah,
exactly. Well, that's the point.
If you ever did read it in there, well, for me, I was often just looking for the juicy bits. That would be nothing.
And also, you were meant to get an impression in the supper, weren't you?
That's right.
I remember a family like I lived with in Bristol. They spent like about 2 or 3 hours reading ministry, looking up all these references after the supper, and I was just sort of like twiddling my thumbs because I didn't know what to do.
I went to sleep. I went to sleep because I had too much port in the supper.
Yeah. So that's perhaps something else, right? If we can pause on that before we move on a bit, Murray. But in the supper for communion, they would have 40% strong port, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
To represent the Lord's blood.
Yeah.
And it's one of my personal bugbears that they would actually encourage young children to drink that, to the point where if they actually took a sip of this 40% alcohol, it's wonderful because they're having a sip of, you know, they're embracing the death of the Lord and so on. And it's one of my big bugbears. Mainstream churches tend not to use alcoholic communion now for that reason. Yeah, they certainly don't for children. Absolutely don't for children.
Well, you put in a post, didn't you, earlier on Facebook?
Yeah.
That it's actually illegal to give children.
Yeah.
Just on that, I have touched on it in my book, but I do sort of, I feel a certain guilt towards my own children in that you were forced to, you know, if they didn't take the wine, because often the little children didn't like it, they didn't like the big cup, they'd push it away, and you know, I remember being scowled at because I give up.
Yeah.
And you know, you're talking about 5-6 month old baby here.
So if we pause that and then we'll move on to what happened next for you, Murray. But what you're actually saying there, Anne, is that you would be frowned upon because you were not comfortable with giving your 5-6 month old baby 40% alcohol.
Well, it wasn't even, it was more the fact that he didn't want it.
Yeah,
and you didn't
insist. So you didn't insist.
If you didn't keep at it, even if they were pushing it away, it was frowned upon because. I remember once because I think it was probably Scott, but he took the bread but wouldn't have the wine. Yeah. And I remember after the meeting, a certain brother picked the cup up and brought it over to me to give to him.
And how old would he have been? How old would he have been at that point?
He's 6 months old.
Oh my!
But he brought it over to me, totally embarrassed me before anybody else got up.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. That happened in our subdivision quite a bit.
It's ridiculous. It was ridiculous. And I'll say it was, to my shame, but we were told that we should drink into the cup. You didn't just have a sip. You drink to the Lord. Well, I've got one hell of a cavern in my mouth. And I
Did they have to fill the cup up after you'd had it, Murray?
It was a little mission of mine to see how much I can make it drop when I.
Yeah.
But then, of course, I'd get home, and I used to do this. I'd get home and I'd have a bottle of port in the fridge because they chilled it.
Mm.
Yeah.
And actually, when you chill it, it's much more drinkable.
Mm.
And it's actually quite. And I used to bullshit my way around it. So it was lovely. You could feel the Lord moving inside you as this port went down. You could feel it run down. It was flipping piss cold alcohol. That's why, mate.
At 6 o'clock in the morning.
When you had nothing to eat.
Yeah.
You had
Last
nothing
12
to eat.
hours or whatever.
Oh yeah, because you wouldn't have breakfast before the supper.
No.
And I'd get home and I'd have another glass. I've got a taste for it. It was like, I like that feeling. It's like you just
that warm,
yeah.
That became a bit of a thing actually after the supper. That was in recent years, not long before I left anyway. It was the sort of a thing that you made sure you had a bottle of port in the fridge for after the supper. So you'd go out, and that was the start of your Sunday, wasn't it?
Yeah. And then
carried on drinking and driving and everything else.
You get to the 10:30 service with a thumping bad head because
you basically started a bit early. I mean, it is laughable, but it's actually.
But it's not. I mean,
it's
serious.
As I made that point on that post, it is illegal to give alcohol to under 5-year-olds. End of. And it's what you're teaching those children or what children are being taught makes you wonder, doesn't it? Yeah. Anyway, we digress, but it's what these conversations are all about. Murray, carry on. You're 19.
I'm 19. Yeah, so we'll fast forward anyway. I got married. I didn't leave, and I don't think I didn't make a decision not to leave. But I met my wife to be, and it kind of worked. And I want to just put this out there now. My wife, she's a lovely person, and she still is a lovely person. My stance, I kind of took advantage, I'm going to say, of circumstances which enabled me to be a normal Plymouth brother in the church. I was 23, so I was pushing it a bit, 21, 22 as everyone was married. I was 23. I couldn't afford to get married, really. I hadn't, because if you bear in mind, for listeners not in the church, you had to buy, it was the brother's responsibility, the man's responsibility to buy a house. It was the woman's responsibility to furnish it. But you had to buy a detached house. I couldn't buy a flat. I couldn't buy a semi. I couldn't buy a terrace. It had to be a detached house. So, and then also they were getting very, very picky about areas as well. There would be areas that weren't suitable for brethren not to live in. So the bar was quite high, and I was falling short of the bar in many ways. And if you like, I was living this fake life. I was living a facade, really, in the brethren. And my facade was about to be ripped down because I was getting to a point where I couldn't go any further without actually putting my hands up and saying, do you know what? I'm not the person you think I am. I can't afford to buy a house. I'm in trouble. I've been, I'm not pure as far as they're concerned. I'm not a virgin.
Location.
And then I met my wife. I mean, her brother actually married my sister, which was how I came across her. And I'd made a point of never, ever, this is a brethren word, fraternizing with brethren girls, so sisters, women in the brethren. The reason I didn't do that was because I only had 50% control over it. If she decided to confess that, we'd been doing things we shouldn't, then I was banged to right. So I tended to sort of, I didn't shit on my own doorstep, basically. I played away.
Yeah.
I'm not selling myself very well here.
But we understand what you mean. Yeah.
But, so anyway, and I met my wife to be, and we didn't do anything particularly abnormal, but we did probably venture a bit further than I had with any other brethren girl. To the point that I thought, shucks, I'm going to have to do something about this. And basically, the easy route for me was to marry her. And we managed to get a house, and we cobbled a few things together. And, you know, there were some very generous brethren that lent me money to help me buy my house. And, you know, so I kind of winged it for a bit. But then I think it was about 2 or 3 years into that, into my marriage, that it all came out about what I've been doing before I got married.
Right.
And I won't go into details of how it came out, but it all came out, and it was a case of I actually got withdrawn from. So my wife, bless her, she was quite rightly so. She felt she'd been cheated on, in the sense that, you know, she thought she'd married one thing and she'd married something else. And this, I'm not proud of this. It's, you know, it's a fact. It's what it was. And actually I was 26 at this time, and that's actually when I knew that I was saved. That's when I finally I was conscious that I was saved. And I just put this here as well. I tell people, and this is true, I've got my faith. I am a Christian by faith. I'm not religious. I have, you know, and I respect people for their beliefs. I don't force and if someone wants to talk about it, I'll talk about it. I'll help someone if I can. But I am a Christian. I believe in God, and I believe in Jesus and the Holy Spirit. And nothing ever will take me away from that. But I understand that other people view things very differently and have a different take on it. And yeah, so I was withdrawn from, and I was going over all these matters. And, you know, once I go over these matters, you have to write down my history. And I was interested. Was Stephen Gear, when he said about, you know, reading a history out like I forget the word he used, was like a shopping list, just list of sins, you know.
Yeah, a list of what you actually got up to that they're going to find sinful, or
Yeah, well, I basically wrote a dirty novel. Yeah. You know, for the priest to read. Yeah. You know, this was my story. Yeah. I would have put Mills and Boone had nothing on me, I'll tell you.
and in a sense, that's what's so wrong about it. They're personal things.
Yeah.
And, you know, growing up in a normal situation, I'm sure most people do things that they perhaps wish they hadn't, or perhaps wish they'd done more, or whatever. But it's nobody's business.
Exactly.
It's not public. Exactly. It's not public washing, is it? You might want to tell your partner if you felt, but it's not public washing, and they make it public washing, don't they?
Exactly. Yeah. And then also it's worth pointing out that the types of things that you put in there, they're actually, and this is the thing, I felt I was abnormal. You know, I thought I must be wrong. I must be weird. I must be a pervert. I must be strange because I like all these things. And they're just normal.
They're just an 18-year-old lad.
It's an 18-year-old lad doing what 18-year-old lads do, finding out about the big wide world.
Yeah.
And, you know, but the problem is you've written this down, and somewhere in the ether, there's these documents that I've written of all these confessions of things I've done, you know.
So did the priest, if you wrote it down and obviously they come and see you, do they then take those notes away? Was that how it worked? Or
they do, yeah. But the interesting thing, the teaching on it, and I'll come on to this, because my big issue with the brethren is that they don't know how to practice what they preach. They don't actually understand what they're preaching. That's the big thing that I've come to. And I believe what was said was, write your sins down, take them to somebody. They said, and I think what they said was a true priest wouldn't even read them. He wouldn't even read them. A true priest would take those and he'd you know, the idea was he put it in the fire. You've come to it as a person. Yeah. You've come. It's your own conviction. You've had the balls to write it down, and you've had the balls to bring it to me. I don't want to know about it. Yeah, it's covered. Yeah, you've done that. The blood of Christ covers that. That's in my basic understanding. That's what Christianity is about. That's what confession is about. You don't have to pay for it. You don't have to, you know, there's no, it's forgiven, it's forgotten, and it's between me and God. Whereas they would take it. I know that there was a brother in Northampton had a ring binder on me in his study. There was a ring binder on Murray, along with a ring binder on other people as well. And he took great delight telling me one day, he said, just by the way, Murray, I was letting you know I've destroyed everything. You know, this was like 4 or 5 years after. So anyway, this time when I want to share this because it's important to me. So when I was withdrawn from, I had my eldest lad was born. He would have been 2 or 3. And I was living I moved out of the main house, and I'd got like a garden, a man cave down the bottom of the garden. And I was living there. And what was quite interesting was at that point I was selling engineering supplies for a company in Bedford, Brethren Company. And we were selling speed glass welding helmets, and they then got bought by 3M, the big 3M, the big American company.
Yeah.
And 3M, I was actually headhunted by 3M to go and work for them selling the speed glass helmets, because I'd been selling them for 3 or 4, you know, I knew the product. And it all happened at this time. It was almost like, so I was 26, that was 2006. And it was like, you know, it would have been 10, 15 grand a year more than I was earning. And bear in mind, I was earning quite well because of the Brethren standards of earning, whatever. It was almost like this was an opportunity for me to actually go and, you know, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I couldn't bring myself to actually leave and then leave my son. And knowing, again, at that point, I'd lose my son. And I struggled with this, and I think it was about 3 or 4 months, and I wasn't getting anywhere. The priests were coming to see me, and I was feeling more and more, you know, I was trying to be good, but I wasn't really feeling it. And they weren't feeling that I was good enough to go back. And then it was a Saturday. I went off on a Saturday, and I went to a pub, and I had a drink, and I came home, and it was a bit, had a bit of a bad day. And then it was on the Sunday morning, my wife came down and she brought my breakfast down and opened the door, and she'd put it just inside the door in the little kitchen area. And my son came in, and he was 3. And I remember to this day, I pretended I was still asleep, and he came up and he leant over me and gave me a kiss, and he just said, "Don't go away again today, Dad." And my wife told me, she said, "I never told him to say that. That was literally from him." And I was a mess. But I did go off that day. I went into town, and I got drunk. I did things that I'm genuinely ashamed of. And I was walking back. It was Sunday night. I was walking back across the park. It was 2006, because Bruce Hales was coming to Northampton on the Tuesday. And I think this was part of why I'd found out. And this was part of why I was really down, because that was quite a big event for Northampton. And my wife wasn't going to be there, and I wasn't going to be there. And this was like, and I think kind of my reaction was to just blow off and go and do, you know, I went and did my worst, if you like. And I was walking back across the park in Northampton, and I was stank of smoke. I was I was drunk. Well, I was obviously, I knew what was going on, but I'd had too much to drink, and I felt really, really dirty, and I was a wreck. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to hell. I genuinely thought I was going to hell, and that's when the first time in my life I was scared. I thought there was no option for me. I'm going to burn in a lake of fire, and that was. And funny enough, there was a distant cousin of mine. He was driving past the park at that time, and he stopped. Well, he shouldn't have stopped, but he did. You know, and he ran across the park, probably ran 100 meters, threw his arms around my neck and said, "Murray, it's lovely to see you. We can't wait for you to be back." And I said, I'm not gonna, you know, you won't be seeing me again. I'm finished. I'm done. I'm finished. There's no hope for me. And he goes, "No, Murray, there is hope for you. You're okay. You'll be okay." And that was like, wow, you know, where did that come from? And I got home, and I remember going up. I went into the main house. I went upstairs. I ripped all my clothes off, threw them out the window. I was absolutely right. I was having a shower. I was just trying to wash myself clean, literally physically clean. And my wife said, "Do you want me to call the priests?" I said, "Yeah, you can if you want. I'm beyond caring." Anyway, they turned two brothers turned up, and I told them everything. I'd sort of calmed down a bit by then. I kind of resigned myself to, you know, when you cry. I don't know if you ever cried so much you just run out. There's nothing left to cry. Just
yeah.
And I told them what I'd done, and they sat there and they looked at each other. They just shook their heads and they looked at each other. And they're like, "Oh, well, I don't know. And of course, that filled me with an enormous amount of confidence. It was like, yeah, I'm definitely finished. Definitely, I'm done. And they literally didn't know what to say or what to do. And in the end, I said to them, "Can we pray? Will you pray with me?" And they sort of looked at each other and said, "Well, I suppose we can, yeah." So we all knelt down, and I waited for one of them to start praying, and they didn't. Nobody said anything. So I started praying, and I can't remember what I said. I don't know. All I remember is a hand on my shoulder, and the Lord said to me, he said, "I've got you, Murray, you're mine." And these other two priests, they were the other side of the room. And they tried to tell me since then that maybe I'm not saved because, you know, and they've tried to unsave me. I'm sorry. I said, "I'm sorry, that happened. I can't explain it. I can't tell you anything. I know at that point, I knew I was saved." So that's where, you know, that's where I stand on that. And they've tried time and time again since then. You know, every time I failed, they'd say, "Well, we'd have to question whether you are, Murray." You know, I was like, "No, you can't be saved today and lost tomorrow. That's what you preach. Yeah, you go and study your scripture. Oh yes, but you know the way. No, there's no buts. I was saved on that day." You know.
So just if I can just paint a picture of what led up to that a little bit. So you were withdrawn from at that point.
Yeah.
And you had your house, and you had living a shed or something in the garden that you had to live separate from your wife and young child.
Correct.
And was your wife confined in any way at that point?
Yeah, she was confined, and she was actually not allowed to go to the meeting where Bruce Hales came to.
Right. So that's why I wondered, because you mentioned that. Yes.
Yeah, which they actually said afterwards she should have gone.
Yeah. She
shouldn't have been. But again, that's the Chinese whispers.
Yeah. This all this. So you're in a situation where you're having to live separate in a separate building, and your wife was cooking meals and bringing them down to you. And I'm only painting that picture because my understanding that is what happens, isn't it? You have to live separately, and what that
in your own home,
in your own home with your family you love, bringing meals to you on a plate, then walking away and not hardly speaking to you, and what that can do to one's mental well-being, I think. Or doesn't, you know, it can destroy one's mental health, can't it?
Yeah, well, I think you're dead right there, Jackie. And part of the reason for telling this is that what I realise is over my life, my mental health hasn't been stimulated; it's been eroded. My belief in myself. And I think a lot of brethren would bear this out. A lot of people coming out of that system, I think, would bear it out, that your whole thinking, you get yourself into such a situation, you don't believe in yourself. You know, you don't trust yourself.
You're not meant to. You're taught not to.
You're taught not to.
You're taught to say, "Oh, wretched man that I am," every morning, aren't you?
Yeah, and to the point that you actually don't. You know, can I even make a right decision? Can I even?
They absolutely smash your self-esteem, don't they?
Yeah. Am I qualified to decide whether something is right or wrong?
Yeah.
To the point that you're asking, you all the time, everyone's running around asking everyone else for approval to do something, to the point that nobody's got a spine, because, you know, and that's anyway. That they actually spoke to Bruce Howes about me on the Tuesday, and he's very briefly he said, "Oh, what Murray needs to do is he needs to keep a quarter of an hour timesheet and report at the end of every day what he's been doing."
Well, there's a straitjacket if ever I saw one.
Yeah. So, Muggins.
Yeah.
15-minute timesheet.
You did it, didn't you, Murray?
I did it. And I did that for 4 years.
Whoa.
4 years.
Whoa.
I would go to my brother's house at the end of every day, and he'd look through my timesheet and he'd sign it off at the end of the day. Somewhere, they're probably still at my old house in the loft somewhere, there's reams of timesheets. I'm sorry. Sometimes I go 2 or 3 hours and think, shit, I haven't filled this. And I'll be like, it was full of bullshit.
Yeah.
Because it was it was. Yes, yeah. And you know, done everything you should do.
Control right there, isn't it?
Yeah. And the point was, if I'd done something that was frowned upon, that wasn't on my timesheet.
No, you're not going to write it down anyway.
Of course it wasn't.
7 to 7:30. Went to the pub, had 2 pints.
Yeah. No, sitting in my car reading ministry.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
What you've been doing.
Yeah.
Going over my impressions from the supper.
Yeah.
Over a Guinness.
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, but then of course, from that point on, everything I did was under scrutiny, under suspicion. And the truth is, I couldn't stop myself from making friends outside the church.
Right.
I am, you know, I was a buyer for a workwear company. I was buying. I had a lot of contacts, a lot of, I did quite well at it. Well, they certainly seemed to appreciate me doing the job anyway, but I did, and I'd go for coffees with people, and they want to take you for meals, and who says no to a free dinner? Come on. But an interesting thing is, also, they couldn't get their head around the fact that how a man could go for a coffee with a woman and it could just be business. It had to be something corrupt. And no matter, you could tell them to your blue in the face, there's nothing in it. I'm not in the slightest bit interested in her. We went for a coffee. Well, why'd you do that? Well, because I can. You know, yes, I'm sorry, I shouldn't, you know, and blah, you know. But it was, it had to be more than I said it was, you know. Sometimes I might have fancied it being more than I said it was, but that's beside the point. But the truth was that often I would be apologising for something I hadn't really done.
Yeah.
Yes, I'd been perhaps a bit friendly with somebody. I'd been a bit too much, but anyway, fast forward to 2016. I think we've been married 16 years before I left. No, 15 years. And it'd been hard work. And my wife, bless her, she didn't trust me. I didn't trust myself, and I was trying to do the right things and kept getting into trouble, and we weren't really in love. It was, you know, hindsight, I realised that's what it was. It was sad, and but 2016 came, and we were refurbishing the primary school in Northampton, and I was meant to be running the project. And I said to myself, I thought, you know what, I can't do this anymore. I'm going to finish this project, and I'm just going to go. I'm not going to cause any trouble. I don't want to make a scene. I'm just going to leave. I can't live this life anymore. And this was my plan. And then there was a young brother he'd been in Sydney. Him and his wife had stayed in Sydney for 6 weeks for something, and he came back, and he'd had meetings with Bruce Hales, and he came back with really enthusiastic and really genuine teaching on a scripture, the man in the possessed by demons in the tombs is cut himself with stones, and then the Lord cast out the demons. They went into the pigs, and they all ran into the sea or something. Anyway, it was a scripture that was often talked about and discussed. And he came back, and he had this sort of fresh life about him. And I thought, okay, John, I'm going to get you to put your money where your mouth is. So I phoned him up and said that I'm in trouble. No, I said, can you help me? And he thought I was asking him to come and work on the school. And I said, no, I need you to come and talk to me. So I told it, he came along, and I told him that what I was struggling with and everything. And he was like, okay. And he got someone else involved, because it's worth, for those that aren't, you always have 2 priests. It's based on a scripture. I think it's on the witness of something like more than one. Like, one person isn't enough to pass judgment.
And just to pause that point, there's always 2 priests, but you're not allowed support as the person receiving the priestly, are you? I mean,
absolutely. No.
Like, you couldn't have your friend there, or
no.
So,
and very much it would be considered that the priest would be the person to help.
Yeah.
But yeah, and he called someone else in, and for a few months, and we worked through a lot of things, and I tried to sort my life out again and get myself on the straight and narrow. But then the official priests, the older, got wind of something going on, and they were like, oh well, John's not qualified to do this, and they started getting involved. And they thought, well, they better speak to Australia, so go to Sydney and speak to Bruce Hales. But I don't think they did. I think actually they spoke to Roger Kirkpatrick, who was obviously a fairly powerful henchman. And he said, well, he passed his judgment on it. And I think on the light of his word, they decided I needed to be confined.
Right.
So I was confined it was actually May the 7th, I think, 2017. Yeah, because that's right. It was 16 we did the school. There was a few months or whatever. And the reason I remember that is because I'd actually had a digger delivered that day to do the garden. And it worked out quite well in my favour that I was stopped from going to the evening meetings and the weekends. So
you had all this time on your hands.
Yeah, I jumped on a digger and did my garden. And so they decided I'd be confined, which meant so I lived in my house with my family, 3 children at the time. But I was in the spare room, we had an ensuite, and I had my own little space in there. And again, my wife would cook food for me, but she carried on going to the meeting. She wasn't confined this time. And the children, so her and the children would carry on going to the meetings, and I would stay at home. And this went on for about coming on a year, I believe. And I kind of didn't get anywhere, and then that's right, by this time I think about 4 people had been brought into the mix. 4 or 5 people knew what Murray's troubles were, and this priestly circle was getting ever bigger, you know. And then there was another brother was going to Germany, and he was going, very privileged. He was going to he was very close to Bruce Hales, basically because he was a really good musician, and he went to entertain him. That was the top and bottom of it. And to be fair, he was a nice enough guy, but he was no more spiritual than, you know, anyone else. He was just a very good musician, so it made him very popular. And I was asked to write down, you know, everything I'd been going on with, everything I'd done, and, you know, they would take this. And one thing we were told was, if you're serious about getting free of your sins, you don't minimize them. You know, so if there was a detail, and I genuinely did this because I was genuinely wanted to just get on with life. I couldn't live in this void. If I wasn't sure about a detail, how many times I'd been to this place or how long, you know, I erred on the extreme side rather than minimize it. So they couldn't come back to me in, you know, a few years' time and say, you know, oh, but you didn't say this. So okay, this was a great long list. And anyway, this brother got back, and his dad came to me at work one day. He said, "Oh, Murray, we'd like to come and see you at 5:30 tonight, if that's okay." And I thought this was great because they normally came after the evening service. So it'd be like 9 o'clock, 8:30, 9. So I think it was 7:15 on a Tuesday was the time for the ministry meeting. And I thought, oh, well, maybe this is, I'm going to be restored, you know, get back to the church. Because they want to come and see me. It's time for them to put it to the brethren, and then I can perhaps go to the evening meeting. Anyway, I thought this. I was quite excited for most of the afternoon until late afternoon. I got a message from my wife, something to the effect. She said, "I'm praying for you. I hope you'll take what they have to say in the spirit of love it's intended," or something like that. And that was the moment I thought, this may not be what I think it's, you know, might not be going back. And no, basically they put it to Bruce Howes, and he said, "Well, I think Murray should be withdrawn from." So to be confined, you're in the church, but you're not allowed to take part in the church, but you're still part of the church. To be withdrawn from, you are not part of the church. You're out of the church, but it's with a view to recovery. So just to try and sum it up for those that don't. So basically I was no longer in the brethren. I was withdrawn from. And by 9 o'clock, so my wife had packed my bags. For 5:30 they came to see me. 7 o'clock they went, 7:15 they put it to the congregation. After the evening service they came back. By 9:30 I was moved out of my house into another house. It belonged to a young brother, one of the priests. His son had a house that he wasn't living in. And I went with this, and when I look back on it, I think, why did I let them do that to me? But they did. Forget it. And that really was the beginning of the end. I went on a 4-week bender. I think that was end of November, right up till Christmas Day. I maxed out a credit card. I just did everything. I went and spent Christmas with someone that I knew down in Surrey, and he was actually driving back Boxing Day. That I suddenly thought, "Murray, what are you doing? You're going to lose everything. You're going to lose your family." And this was the big thing. So I had a really good job. I had a lovely house. You know, look at it from the outside. People looked at, wow, Murray's got everything. You know, 2 cars, 3 lovely children, lovely house, good job. But I was miserable. I was absolutely miserable. And you can process losing your job. Yeah. You process living on less money. Yeah, it's difficult, but you can do it. I'm going to lose my house. yeah, you can deal with that. You're going to lose your children. That you cannot. And then people will say, oh yes, but you can have, you've got rights, you've got this. It's traumatic for everybody involved. And it's always traumatic for children when parents separate. It's not uncommon, but there's an added layer or multiple layers of trauma.
There is added layer for children of parents like your children, Anne, and yours, Murray, because if a marriage breaks down, it's sad, it happens. And sometimes there can be acrimony and there can be lawyers and there can be difficulties.
Mm-hmm.
But often there ends up being a status quo where the children end up having both parents in their lives.
Yes.
Albeit living separately, sometimes, not always, but that is usually the ultimate aim of most people and actually of the courts.
Yes.
That they have both parents in their lives.
Yes.
But that just doesn't happen in a brethren situation because the children that are in, they are gradually, even if you are able to see them, they are gradually drip fed. I would only say poison about the parent that's left, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that is what's wrong, just wrong.
I'll come on to that because I've had a really, really sad email from my eldest son 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
But it's what you say, it's the drip feeding. It's painful. And so in the light of that, I then phoned up the priests, the elders, and said, look, I've come round, I've been doing this, I've been away. That's right, because they hadn't been to see me. I don't think they hadn't been to see me. They put me in this house and they did not come to see me for at least 2 or 3 weeks. And when they did, I kind of, I obviously didn't tell them I was doing anything, doing stuff I shouldn't be doing as far as they're concerned. But then I said, look, I got them round and I said, this is what I've been doing and whatever. And they took my credit, all my bank cards away from me. And again, I let them do this. And they then gave me, I was given, I think I was given 120 or 100 pounds or 120 pounds a week for my food and fuel for my car to get to and from work. But that was given to me in vouchers. So I didn't have cash. So I'm a 37-year-old man, 38-year-old guy on a 6-figure income, and he has 120 pounds a week in vouchers. And what I actually used to do was I would so I had a Tesco reloadable car for my food, and I had Morrison's vouchers for my fuel. And Morrison's at that time gave change on their vouchers. So I would go and put £11 worth of fuel in my car.
You used a lot of fuel.
£11 worth of fuel, and I got £9 change. And I'd do that twice a week. And on a Thursday night, I'd walk into the village where they had a music jam on with £18 in my pocket.
Yeah.
And
wow.
Yeah, that's another story. But anyway, so this is going back to this brother come back from Germany, having been with Bruce Hales, and Bruce Hales had said, we need clear evidence that the Lord's come in and taken up Murray's case and he's never going to sin again, or words to that effect. I forget the exact words, but that was the. So I said to them, I said, okay, what does that look like? And they said, we'll know when it's happened. We'll know. Right. So I've been on my 4 or 5 week bender. I've thrown in the towel. I've submitted. I then spent 6 months where all I did was go to work, go shopping for my food. I went for a run every day, and I set myself a target once a month. I'd run around Pitsford Reservoir, which is like a 7.5 mile run. That was my only focus in life. And I read the scriptures and I read ministry and I looked up stuff and I wrote reams and reams of notes. I was trying to find something, but I don't know what I was trying to find. And the priests would come. They come twice a week, always 2 of them, like we said, sometimes as many as 5. They'd come twice a week. They'd sit round in this room and they'd basically interview me, how have you been getting on? What have you done? What have you come to? And I had to demonstrate some kind of spiritual progress every time they came. And I was trying to genuinely demonstrate it, but truthfully, it was bullshit, a lot of it. And basically, I think what they were wanting me to say was, I will never fraternize with anybody in the world ever again. Socially, physically, anything, Well, I wasn't prepared to do that because I know with the best will in the world, knowing who I am, I will do it. Yeah. I might go a year and be really, really good. And then I'll slip up and I'll be back to, and I'd got myself out of trouble time and time before by saying what they wanted me to say, but not really believing it. And then just being this miserable liar, basically, because I'm living one thing and doing another. But obviously, you imagine this, they kept saying, you're making really good progress, man, really good progress. And I'll be like, great, maybe I felt like I was nearly there. Keep going. And obviously I was getting more and more depressed, more and more.
What was your mental health like through these months?
My mental health, and bear in mind, I was a manager at work.
Yeah.
And I had a team working, and I was down to one person. The only non-brethren person in my team is me and Carol. She was lovely, really good to me. She was, and like brethren members of staff would come in and they would ask Carol's sitting across from me, sort of 3 meters away, her desk. They'd ask Carol a question that I needed to answer. I'd give Carol the answer and she'd repeat it to them. And they're standing in the door 2 meters from me. Come on, that's not.
I'm just thinking of that is just. I mean, you think of that from Carol's perspective, a normal non-brethren person, and she's sitting there being go-between. She must be thinking, who are these people?
Oh, she knows.
Why is this happening? She got to know very quickly. Yeah.
Honestly, she's amazing. She was like, she was an angel to me. She was like, because they, so you're not only that, I was trying to be professional at work, but I'd lost they had no respect for me. Any respect or any of them ever had for me was gone, because I was nothing to do with whether I was good or bad at work. It was because I was withdrawn from the brethren. To the point that the day I was withdrawn from, I think I walked in, we had an all-staff meeting. There was about 30 brethren working there and a similar number of non-brethren. One of the non-brethren, I said, what's happened to Murray? Was something's clearly, like, they noticed that I was being shunned. And so anyway, they kept going on for 6 months, and I was feeling more and more stressed, more and more angry, but I didn't dare show my anger because it would be viewed as a step back. Like a regression. And then one day they played a bit of a nasty trick, and they brought along an older brother who I actually really respected, and they knew I really respected him. They knew I had he was different. He was very much a raw, a bit controversial, could be a bit cantankerous, but he would stand his ground. If he knew what was right, he would stand his ground. And, you could quote Bruce Hales at him till you're blue in the face. Scripture says. And he would put himself, but he was clever enough not to cross the line to get himself, but he would stand by the truth rather than the Chinese whispers that have come down from Sydney. And they brought him along, and knowing that he might be a bit quite effective on me. And anyway, I'd had enough by this time. I was burnt out and I was done. And we're sitting there, and there was one of the elders was a bully, very vocal, and he was just a bully to anybody and everybody he came across. And his brother was a yes man. And I actually had more respect for the bully than I did for his brother, because at least the bully, at least you knew where you stood with the bully. The yes man, he was spineless. He was just like, he literally would say yes, 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 yes. And he'd be like, whichever way the wind was blowing, he'd agree with it. So I sat there. They asked me what progress I'd made, and I was holding everything together. And I said to this brother, so-and-so, can I ask you a question? And he's like, yes, 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 of course you can, Murray, of course you can, yes, yes, yes. I said, I'd like you to tell me about the time where you came to the end of yourself and you knew that the Lord had come in and taken up your case and you were never going to sin again. Can you just tell me about your experience when that happened for you? And he sat there and he said, well, I don't know if I can. I mean, that's a very difficult, very difficult question, Murray. I don't know the answer to that. And I stood up and I said, well, how the fuck do you expect to get me there then?
They're your actual words.
They were my words, yeah.
Fantastic.
Every jaw in the room just
went, what did he just say?
But the point was, I'd had enough. I was going nowhere.
Yeah.
I'd done 6 months. I'd ticked every box. I'd done everything you'd asked me to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm human. I'm not.
Yeah.
I am never going to be.
Yeah. So was that the actual tipping point for you, that particular visit, or
that visit? That was kind of. I said, you might as well leave now, and they all went. One brother sort of stayed. He said, Murray, don't give up hope, don't you? I said, no, I'm finished. You know.
Yeah.
And I kind of kept it all together for a few more months, because obviously I was trying to get myself into gear and get my work out what I didn't know what the future looked like. There's still the reality of losing everything, the reality of my children going. And I went into work one morning, and it was a Friday morning. I went in at 7:30. I sat down at my desk and I just bawled my eyes out. I just cried. I couldn't explain why, apart from I was completely burnt out and I could not help myself. And Carol said to me, she said, Murray, go and sit in the car. She said, I'll hold the fort here. So I went and sat in the car, sort of try and get myself together. And about half an hour later, she came out and she said, how are you feeling? I said, yeah, I'll be fine. I'll come in a bit. And she said to me, she said, you need to go and see a doctor. And I said, no, I'll be fine. I mean, okay. She said, Murray, you need to go and see a doctor. And I said, no, I said, Carol, I can't, she said, Murray, you need to go and see a doctor. Don't come back in. She said, I'll hold the fort. If anyone asks me, I'll tell them that you've gone out, whatever. I'll make sure, keep it. You go and see it. So I said, okay. Phoned the doctor, went to see the doctor and told him everything, told him what was going on. And he asked me a long list of questions. And he said, Murray, he said, I'm signing you off with severe anxiety and depression. You're in no fit state to function at work. And I was like, well, what does this mean? Because, I can't, sick pay is not going to pay my mortgage, and, how's everything going to happen? And he said, no, he said, I cannot, he said, I'll be negligent of my duty to let you go without signing you off. So I handed in this sick note and went home, sort of processing the reality of it all. About an hour or so later, I got a phone call from one of the elders. And he said, Murray, we understand you've been to see the doctor. We'd like to come and see you, make sure everything's okay. So I was like, okay, fair enough. It's inevitable. This is going to happen. 2 of them turn up. First question they asked me was, why didn't you tell anyone you were going to the doctors? It's like,
oh,
dear God.
Well, I did. Carol knew that I was going to the doctor. Yes, but you never told anyone you should have told someone you were going to the doctor. Why? I'm 37 or 38-year-old bloke now.
But things like that are confidential.
Yeah. I dealt with my professional duties, as in,
make sure work was covered.
Knew where I was, and it wasn't like I'd disappeared off the face of the earth. In a management position, I came and went quite a bit anyway. It wasn't although pretty much every move I made was tracked, but that's another story. So anyway, that was their first question. I was like, okay, we'll deal with that. Second question, obviously what we'd like to know, we're just concerned what you may have told the doctor that would bring the testimony into disrepute.
And that's the absolute truth of why they don't like the brethren going to the doctor, isn't it? And that's the truth of why they like, if you do go to the doctor, they like someone to go with you.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's just so telling, isn't it? It's
it was like scales fell from my eyes. This was like, that is the bottom line.
Yeah.
You're looking at someone who a few weeks before I'd had too much to drink. Something happened, and I ended up driving across the causeway at Pittsford at 120 miles an hour, thinking, if I lose control and hit a tree, I don't give a shit. And that was my thought. And then all you're worried about is what I told the doctor.
Because they want to be in control of the narrative, don't they?
Yeah. Absolutely right, Ross. Yeah.
But I think the whole thing that was disconcerting for me, I hadn't been caught or found out doing something I shouldn't do. I'd put my hand up and said, I'm in trouble.
Yeah.
Luke 15, the prodigal son, is one of the most preached scriptures in the brethren. Or it certainly was up to when I left. Anybody and everybody could give you an acceptable preaching on Luke 15. The younger son takes everything, his father's inheritance from his father, goes to a far country, has a great time, does everything he wants to do, blows all the money, realizes he's sinned, realizes he's done wrong, goes back to his father's house in repentance, and the father rushes out, receives him back into his house, puts him, he said he'd go back and be a servant, and the father restored him to the highest order in the house. He'd been lost and he was found. He'd come back. I was lost. I put my hand up. In brethren terms, I was lost. I put my hand up, said I'm in trouble, and all that actually happened over a 2-year period was I got pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed.
And how much of that came down to your surname?
Comes back to what we discussed before, isn't it? Yeah.
It's an interesting point, Gilly. One brother said to me once, when I'd suggested I might move to Aldbrook because I didn't like it in Northampton. I was fed up of everything. And this brother said to me, he said, "Oh, you can't go there, Murray. We've got too many projects we need you for." So, okay. You just want me to do projects for you, you know?
But that's how demeaning is that?
Yeah,
totally. So after you left, Murray, I know that obviously you didn't see your children for a bit, and then you did try to see your children, didn't you?
Well,
explain what happened there.
Yeah, so what happened there? So I just want to say that the point where I finally made a decision that I'm leaving, I am leaving. The day I made that decision, up until that point, it was really hard emotionally. But the day I made that decision, it was like a massive weight fell off my shoulders. You then start the process of separating officially. And obviously there was my children. And I set out from the start with a genuine intention to not make it any more difficult than it has to be. So I asked if I could see them, and they said no. I said, "Look, I just want to say hello to them. Just give me no." And it wasn't.
How old were your children at that time? They were
so at that
young.
point, they were. So they would have been 13, 6 and 3.
Okay, so quite young. Yeah,
quite young.
Mid-teens and
and it was really, and they were putting up every barrier, and it's very clever what they do, because I was dealing with my wife. So from a legal perspective, it was a dispute between a husband and wife, you know.
Yeah.
But the truth of it, the reality of it, is that behind her, there's a committee, there's a whole institution that's dictating what she does and doesn't do. And as soon as you want to put that into a legal field, it's between, and they'll stand back and say, well, it's between Murray and his wife, you know. And then
church doesn't get involved. It's a marital thing.
Exactly. Yeah. Everyone's free to make their own decisions. Like heck, you flipping are. And so and it wasn't until you gave me that copy, Jackie, of the I forget what it's called, the Charities Commission
Faith and Practice document that I get on my soapbox about.
Well, and I put that to them, and I sent that as an email to my wife. And I pointed out, I said, look, this Charities Commission thing has not gone away, because that was a really scary time for the Brethren. Because if they'd lost their charitable status, they would have owed billions of pounds, because it would all been backdated to who knows when. And that was a real tough fight, and it was quite stressful actually for everybody. So I played on that to a degree, and not wrongly. I said, look, it hasn't gone away. I said, all I'm asking for you is for you to be reasonable. I'm not going to ask the children to do anything they're not comfortable with. I'm not going to force them to do anything they don't want to do. All I want to do is spend time with them. And as a result of that, I got a regular, I'm going to say every 6 to 8 weeks, I had to send an email. I tried to do it more regularly at the start, but it just met with a lot of resistance, and it settled down. 6 to 8 weeks was reasonable. They would run with it. So I ran with that.
So just to clarify a little bit, that the clause that was actually kind of used, and I can't quote the wording off the top of my head, but it was the Brethren agreed in all their trust deeds with the Charity Commission, because one of the concerns was the harm they caused over splitting up families and keeping children from parents that left. They agreed that they would make every effort, all reasonable steps would be taken to allow the continuation of relationships with family members that have left, especially where children are involved. And the wording is something like that.
Correct.
And that was what you sort of quoted to them, wasn't it?
That was what I used.
Yes.
And I made it quite clear that it hasn't gone away. There is there's rumblings, because the stuff I found out since I left, you know, I never knew there were so many ex-brethren around. I never knew that.
They just kind of evaporate when they leave, and you never know about them when you're in, do they?
Exactly. And I think in Northampton there was a brother left with his family about 35 years ago. Who I'm actually now really good friends with. Yes. And then there was me, 35 odd years later. Northampton, anyone who knows Northampton, is a funny place. There's a very self-righteous arrogance, you know, almost a pride that, you know, we haven't lost anybody, you know, in Northampton, and we're almost a holier than thou. And the standards of the competition between families and households was just ridiculous, and I attempted to keep up with it. You know, I did, and I was saying to Ross earlier, we spoke before, you know, I did things and thought things about people that I'm ashamed of. But actually what was driving it was my desire to be accepted. You know,
I think we've all been there.
My desire to fit in this world that I didn't fit into. But fast forwarding, Jackie, on your question with the children, that worked very well until just 2 weeks ago. That's right. So my divorce got finalised. Well, we're waiting for the decree absolute to actually be, you know, we signed for it, but we're waiting for it to actually, the court to sign it off. But I received an email from my wife ex-wife on what would have been our 20th wedding anniversary in February, basically saying, when this is signed off, they've paid me all the way, we don't expect you to turn up unannounced at the house. Because sometimes I would turn up on their birthdays, I'd just turn up, knock on the door and give them some birthday presents. And they were often the best times because you got them off guard, they weren't prepared. And I had some of the best conversations with my children then. Whereas officially, when I was seeing them every 6 to 8 weeks, my dad would come along and we'd meet at the park and we'd go through, and they'd probably had an early morning prayer meeting for all I know, and praying for these children that had to go and see their father who's in the world. So the kids would have just been on their guard all the time. She said, I wouldn't want you to just turn up, and he wouldn't expect you to turn up anymore. It's not your house anymore. And, and then, so I thought, okay, that's kind of understandable. I no longer own anything there, but they're still my children there. So I sent her an email saying, I understand I understand that I respect your wishes, and providing something like providing you're reasonable about, don't make it unreasonably difficult for me to see the children. I will continue to respect your wishes. Basically saying, I'll play ball if you play ball. And then I put in a request saying I'd like to see the children, and I got no reply. And then eventually I got an email from her email. So I haven't got my children's phone numbers. I've got no way of contacting my children electronically. But she told me on good faith, she said, the children normally see your emails before I do. It's a family email and everyone's. So I got an email that was from my son saying, basically, thanks for your email, Dad. I don't want to see you anymore. And you've chosen your life, and the things you want to do and share with me, we could never fit. They could never work. And Talitha, so my daughter, she doesn't want to see you at the moment either. Now, the problem is the younger two have always said that they only want to see me if Levi, the older one, comes with them, which was fine. And I've realised now, I realise I've been played because Levi's 19. He can do what he wants. I've got absolutely no. If I wanted to go legal, I might as well
you've got
nothing. 20 grand,
You've got nothing. You've got nothing. 1 to 16.
No.
But the problem is, I've accepted that the other two come with Levi. That's how it works. So it becomes. So I'm in this situation at the moment. Is what do I do? How do I? The one thing it does play out for me, and I'd like to point this out, because I didn't really come on here to tell my sob story of, feel sorry for me and this. More to the point is that in moving into the big wide world, everyone tells you, and they're absolutely right, is that your children will leave you. So if you're fighting to stay in a relationship you're not happy in a world that you're not happy in, for the sake of your children, just bear in mind, and this comes from someone who has 3 children who I absolutely love and would do anything I could for them. And if they turn their back on me and don't come to me for 20 years, I'll still be there for them. But they will get to an age where they will leave home. They won't, like my son, he's 19. He doesn't want anything. He's decided he doesn't want anything to do with me. I would have written the same letter at his age if my dad had left and I was 19. Because he will be respected for making a stand.
And it will buy him acceptance into the community he happens to be in, won't it?
Correct.
And so you could argue he says, I don't want to see you. But I don't mean this disrespectfully towards your son. Which puppet's pulling his strings? It's the puppet of the community he's been born into.
Exactly.
And
the stigma of having a father who's out of the brethren.
Yeah.
The fact that he's taken his own stand, that'll be a big tick in his, in his eyes.
It will work in his favour. And he would genuinely believe he's doing the right thing.
Yes,
but the point I was going to make is that I've got 3 children. Those 3 children will leave home. Levi, Zadok, the youngest, he will be, he's 8 now. So 10, 12 years time, I'm going to be 55 and he's going to leave home. He'll go and get married and they'll be gone. And I'll be left. You'll be left living in a loveless relationship with no family. There are. So whilst it is the hardest thing I've ever had to deal with, and Anne, I think you'll relate to this, is you have to process it, and I don't know how others do it, but I do tend to focus on what I can change, and what I can't change, I just park to one side. And it comes out at times.
I think,
The reality of life is, why spend another 15, 20 years of misery to be so much older that it's so much harder? Well, I should have left when I was 19. I didn't leave till I was 37, 38. And then part of me looks at it and said, if I'd left at 19, I wouldn't have put 3 children through all that trauma. But then the flip side of that is there's 3 lovely souls on this earth.
And I think,
and you've been chosen to be where you are.
Yes.
It's not, and it's like myself. We tried so hard to fit in, and we just didn't fit in.
Yeah.
So I don't know why I didn't fit in, but you are now a beacon of light to your children. But also, if you think about it, if you'd stayed, well, I know if I'd stayed, I wouldn't be here. But if you'd stayed, what use would you be to your children in that state anyway?
Exactly.
Dan often uses the analogy of on the aeroplane. They tell you who's the first person who has to put an oxygen mask on before you help a child. If you haven't got your oxygen mask on, if you aren't looking after yourself, you haven't got a hope of helping anybody else. And it just helps when you realise that.
Yeah, and that's helpful. And the most honest thing I've ever done in my life was actually stand up and admit to myself and everybody else that I don't belong in there.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah. Because up until that point,
and if you look at it,
carry on.
No, go on. Up until that point,
I say up until that point, everything I did was a lie.
Yeah.
I was demonstrating one thing and doing something else.
Yeah. And that's another thing. Yeah. That's another thing is that for the first time ever, you're actually doing what you told everybody you were going to do. You're actually being honest. You're actually being true. And your children will see that. They mightn't see it now, but eventually our children will realise Mom stuck to what she was doing. Dad stuck to what he was doing. And I can trust them. I know they're not going to change their minds. The rules aren't going to change because they stuck on that path.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of, in a way, I mean, I've not been in the situation that you, Murray, or Anne have been in, but part of the way of coping with it, when it gets to the point where the children are, I will use the word coerced to turn around and write emails like that, and like the letter you got from your daughter, Anne. Once it gets to that point, there's not a lot you can do except, and I'm trying to look for the positive in the negative, to say, this is where I am. My love for you will never change. And you will always you can always contact me. And should that scenario ever happen, as you rightly point out, they're then going to a parent who's probably far more stable in themselves than the parent they might have had their parents stayed together in the brethren.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And one simple thing at that point in their lives. So whenever I do see them, whenever I contact them, they have a card with a little gift in it, my phone number and my address.
Yeah.
And me.
I don't know if they're allowed to keep it. I don't know if they do keep it.
No.
So every time I do that, but the point is, if they come to me in tomorrow or in 10 years' time, they're coming to a parent who is not going to judge them whatever they have done. Yeah. No. Whereas when I was in the Brethren, I would have judged them.
Yes, you'd had to have done. If they'd done something wrong in Brethren eyes, you'd had to have judged them.
Whatever it was, they could tell me the worst thing in the world. I don't care what it is, and I would not judge them for it. And I'd love them to know that and believe that.
Yeah.
But also something I'm conscious we're running away on time.
Yeah.
As we often do. We try not to, but it's just so fascinating. It happens.
I just want to talk about my experience leaving the church, and I found this helpful. It doesn't necessarily work for everybody. But to be fair, what inspired me was to actually come forward and do this. Obviously, Gilly, you told your story. Ross, you told your story, and you come from it from different perspectives. So I was saying to Ross earlier, I'm 99% certain that there are more gay people in the Brethren than us really struggling. So Ross speaking out and Ben speaking out.
10 people are gay, so statistically,
exactly. So that, if they can see that, and I thought, well, okay, there must be people in the church that had similar struggles to me.
Absolutely.
However I am. And one thing I found really helpful, and I made a point when I first left, of not getting too involved with lots of ex-Brethren members. And my reason for that was I didn't want to surround myself with people where the only thing we had in common is we'd all come from this strange cult. And that was the only, and so therefore we almost become a
splinter group.
A splinter group, yeah. So, and I understand that for some people that might be what you need. I mean, I actually make friends very easily. I don't struggle to make friends. But I know for some people it's nice to have familiarity. But I found for myself, I think there's one ex-Brethren member who I do have a lot to do with. And our relationship is based purely on a genuine friendship rather than, of course, when we get together, we have jokes about things that used to go on and we talk about, but I just found that for myself really helpful to build my own set of friends for their own merits.
I think that's really good advice, Murray. I mean, I personally didn't have much to do with ex-Brethren apart from my husband for about 25 years. And it was for that reason. And I think that's something perhaps to point out, if anybody inside is listening, ex-Brethren totally have that in common. We've all got that common and rather peculiar background, but also we're all individuals and we all have different personalities, and there'll be some ex-Brethren you get on well with and some you don't get on so well with, and that is quite okay, isn't it? That's quite okay. That's life.
But that is actually people.
It's people. Absolutely. It's life.
I go to a pub, I get on really well with some people. I tolerate other people and I just ignore others. And that's my choice.
But you can make that choice. And I think that's the difference between when you're in the Brethren. The Brethren are, at the end of the day, human beings with different personalities, just like the rest of us. Therefore, some of the Brethren will get on and some of the Brethren won't get on. But you are supposed to get on. You're supposed to all be. So you end up sometimes being in this incredibly false situation whereby there's some personalities in the Brethren you genuinely get on with and some you don't, and maybe you don't like very much, but you still are supposed to be their brother, their sister, and love them. Whereas out here, you don't have to mix with those personalities.
Exactly. And I think the point that's worth making is that it's not so much whether you decide you want to get on with someone or not. It's the mental, the psychological pressure of being forced to get on with people that you just don't click with.
Nothing in common with.
I remember, you'd understand the entertaining and you'd be given, you'd be allocated sort of 3, 4, 5 families. And I remember we'd look at this list on Thursday night that we're given, and it'd be like, who have we got? And it'd be like, shit, this is going to be hard work.
Yeah.
Or
you look great, that'll be a good evening.
This is going to be a real good bash. And then it gets changed at the last minute, and you'd be like, flipping it. But, I was very much, I was one of these people. If you came to my house, and I think this came from my dad, to be honest with you. Yeah. If you came to my house, whoever you were, from the moment you walked through the door to the moment you left, I will give you my best.
Yeah.
I'll give you everything.
Yeah.
However, sometimes it was really, really, really hard.
Yeah.
You'd have a lounge full of, latterly we had quite a reasonable sized lounge, and we'd get like 20 or nearly 30 people in there sometimes. And when you walk into a room full of 30 people and nobody's saying anything.
I remember painful.
What are we doing here?
Yeah. What is this about?
Flashbacks.
Yeah, it does me. Yeah, and I left monkeys years ago, but it was no different. It's that, yeah.
And not only that, it's costing me flipping nearly $1,000 to feed you lot.
That's the real insult, isn't it?
Yeah. At least make it easy for me to entertain.
Yeah. At least let's have a bit of laugh. Yes, it's no wonder they all have double scotches at 11 o'clock in the morning.
Oh, exactly. Well, that's the only way you got them going, was just give them a load more alcohol.
Yeah.
But no, that's a point that I've found really helpful. And the other thing is, like everybody said, we've all found somebody. I've found people. They say, "Oh, there's nobody like the brethren in the world. Nobody cares about you. Nobody does anything." Like Stephen Gear was saying, I had a job go wrong, massively wrong for me in business last year. Struggled with cash flow, struggled with labour, and there was someone who I was acquainted with, who I knew had a lot of money, and I phoned him up and said, "Look, I knew him from my days when I worked in a brethren company." And he lent me a big chunk of money on completely on trust. He said, I'm not going to charge you any interest. He said, if you want to make a little gift at the end, it's up to you, but there's no pressure. Pay it back when you can. And I paid him back, and I paid him a little bit extra as well. And he said, I'll put that in the coffers. He said, I'll put that to the Lord's work or something. He's a Christian. He's a lovely guy. But he only knew me from dealings he'd had with me in business. Yeah.
So like I said to you before, Murray, I was in the Priory, and a beloved brother from Northampton lent about $5,000, and he said, this needs to be paid back within a certain amount of time, or else we'll start charging you interest.
Yeah. And there was nothing. It was this. That's the difference. And they'll tell you, and I believe that you are on your own. And to a degree, you are on your own. Life is reality. You have to fight your own battles. You have to take your own stand. But the point I'm making is there are decent people out there. And there was another guy who's been working with me, and he's actually a really good friend of mine. And he phoned me up. I laid all the guys. I said, look, guys, I cannot afford to pay you another day. I'm sorry. I'm going to have to let you go. I'll pay you all the money I will pay you the money you're owed. And about 2 or 3 days later, he phoned me up. He said, Murray, so I've got an offer for you. He says, I will give you a week's work for 20 quid a day just to cover my fuel. Well, he effectively gave me over £1,000 as a gift. And he came along. Free labour. He came and he did that for me. Plus, I owed him a big chunk of money, and he said, just pay me that when you can. Now, that was a situation that I was struggling, I've got myself into a sticky situation. I needed help, and people came out of the woodwork to help me.
And
it was quite an interesting thing when I paid him back. So this guy, Mark, and his brother said to me, he said, I asked Mark if he'd ever doubted that I'd pay him the money back. And I found myself thinking, why would he doubt me? That's my, because I'd grown up in this, you trust everybody around you. Why would it even, part of me was a bit offended. So what have I done to make you think I might not pay it back? But that's when I suddenly realized that that's reality. To be fair, he didn't know whether I would ever pay him.
Yeah.
No.
The truth is I have, but he didn't know. I could still owe him that money now. And yes, it's going to come. It's going to come. But it just, there's stark differences between the world I grew up in, we grew up in, and the world we live in now. But the truth is there are people out here who care. There are people, most 90% of people, whether they claim to be spiritualists, atheists, Muslims, Jews, Catholics, whatever they claim, most people are decent and they've got basic Christian ethics. Care for one another, look out for each other, help just people where you
fellow human beings.
Just be a human, you know.
They've got morals.
They've got morals. I've got a really eclectic bunch of friends, and part of me would love to go to a preaching with them one day and just take them, march them all in there, and just sit
them on the back row. Well, it's a place of public religious worship. There's no reason why you can't, Murray.
Exactly.
Anyway,
I think some of them potentially would shrivel up if you poured holy water on them, but
the holy water would step back.
The point is, I know that I could phone them at 2:00 tomorrow morning. So I'm in the shit. They'd say you're a complete dickhead. Come and help you. And I think the big thing is it's a circle of friends that accept you just the way you are. Exactly.
So that's the key thing, isn't it? For all of us, the key thing.
Yeah.
So I was just going to say we've actually been going about 2 hours,
really? Wow.
Which is good, and I could keep going for another hour. I think we ought to perhaps have some care for our listeners who but Murray, really appreciate you coming on, and I think it's fantastic. I think the story about what happened with your children will resonate with many, and but also the way you felt when you were leaving compared to the way you feel now, and it's the same for all of us, I think, but the way you describe it is I hope will be inspirational, particularly to anyone inside who listens. The freedom's priceless, isn't it?
It is. And I think and it's not wrong. It's not wrong. You won't shrivel out, you won't be struck by lightning.
No, it's not a dark place out here.
No. It's not a dark place. God created this world out here as well as the world in there. Or whatever belief you want to put on it.
Well, thank you so much, Murray. Really appreciate you telling your story. I know it always costs people to tell the raw truth, but I think it's helpful. I really do.
No.
Thank you, Murray.
It's good to chat.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a chat. Yeah.
Thank you.
Share your story or be a guest on the show. Email info.getalife@proton.me.